Check.
Hello.
Check.
Hello.
Hello. This is Mike speaking into a mic. All right. I was thinking of a new theme song for the podcast.
Okay.
And it goes like this. Do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do. What do you think? Sounds pretty good, right?
What is that again?
Aha. The listeners will get that song before you did. You do. Do you want me to give you the answer?
Yeah, I do.
It's the X-Men. The
The X-Men,
cartoon
yeah,
theme
nice.
song. Yeah, 90s they really knew how to do theme songs. You had X-Men theme song, the X-Men cartoon. You had the Batman, just like the animated series Batman. And the Spider-Man one was pretty cool too.
Oh, yeah.
It had this cool guitar riff and shit. What happened there?
I thought it was like...
Let's talk about cartoons.
It was like the musicians, they took their moment. Just something simple at the very start. It's a kid's show. Remember, something really quick.
Yeah.
5-minute theme song.
Exactly. It's terrible. I can't stand kids programming these days. I think they've gotten stupider. It has nothing to do with the fact that I'm a 34-year-old man. It's the fact that kids programming is worse now.
Why are you still watching them? At least I have a kid.
It's weird. It's like I often see people give out about a lot of movies and stuff like that, like Marvel movies and Star Wars. It's like, this makes no sense. It's terrible. It's like, you do realize these movies are made for children.
Yeah.
They're not made for you. People are just like giving out. It's like, yes, it's bad.
Full of plot holes. Yeah, of course it is. Kids aren't paying attention.
Yeah. All right, well, folks, that's us talking about media. You know, one of our hard-hitting. Hope that talk doesn't get us cancelled.
Very edgy.
Oh, we're brave. We take a stance on the thatchapter podcast.
So brave.
Hell yeah, we ain't afraid to say nothing. All right, Keith, how are you? Since our last episode, which was Les Bis de
Javron. Good, yeah, not too bad, man. It was funny actually today when I was leaving the house. My daughter, she was like, "Where are you going?" I was like, "Oh, I'm going to Mike to do some work with the podcast." She's like, "Why do you need to be with Mike?" I was like, "Thank you for recognizing it. It's a need and not a want."
Yes,
appreciate that.
Exactly.
But she's after getting her own. She's like, "Okay, well, I have a mic," so she has her own Teddy at home, which she now calls Mike. So
Mike too.
Mike too, yeah.
Wow.
So I'm looking forward to the podcast.
Everybody's got their own mic.
Don't know what to go and talk about.
Yeah, well, it probably sounds better than the shit I come out with half the time. Keith sitting across from me wearing a Hail Satan t-shirt, established 666, number of the beast.
Thanks for it, by the way.
Blasphemous, actually, if you ask me. I didn't realize you were wearing it. I feel like you should get the shit out of my now.
You bought it for me.
I did. That's true. I did actually buy that t-shirt.
You set me up, son of a bitch.
So yeah, any news, any scandal the folks at home want to hear? They want to take us on a journey, if you will, into the mind, the twisted and dark mind, that damn crazy mind of yours.
Not a lot going on upstairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Getting ready for the holidays, for Christmas?
Well, actually, I think when this episode's out, I think it'll be done, won't it?
You are correct. I hope the folks at home had a pleasant holiday. Christmas, if you celebrate, whatever you're doing. I hope it was pleasant or not. Who knows?
Yeah,
I don't know how your Christmas was.
We're speaking to you from the past.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking a lot about time travel.
You really were?
I was,
interesting. Yeah. Tell me more. Speak on this.
Time travel, it only really makes sense one direction, I find. Like, if you're traveling from the past to the future, it's no use to anybody. Also, you'd have like a really, really hard time convincing someone that you were from the past.
Okay.
Like, any information you have, they already know. That's history.
That's true.
If anything, you're less informed. Like, if someone traveled 30 years into the future, you've missed 30 years of societal
That's a good...
things.
I mean, the world could have changed completely. You don't know what happened. Yeah, so you're at a severe disadvantage if you go into the future.
Yeah. So it only ever makes sense going back in time.
That's it. Yeah, if you went into the future and somebody gave you some high-tech piece of technology, it'd be like giving a medieval guy an iPhone. They wouldn't know what to do with it.
Exactly, yeah.
know?
Yeah, it's just basically trying to speak to an old person
That's
who's
what they
missed the last
say.
30 years in a coma. It's the same thing.
Yeah. But if you go into the past, take us on a journey.
I was
through Keith's thought process. Folks at home are gonna love this.
Well, going into the past, going to the past again, I don't know if I could convince someone that I was from the future then even. Because I could explain, I was like, we have all these amazing things, but I don't know how they work.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, you got a TV? Make a TV for me then.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. Good luck with that one. That's a good point. I mean, if you were to go back into any time in history, when would you go?
Oh, okay. I don't know, man. History's rough. Like, especially from doing like...
It is. We talked about this before when we talked about more historical episodes of the podcast. It's like, man, history fucking sucks. I would hate to live in any other time other than right now. The life was way shitter and harder for people back then.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable where I am. What about you? Where would you go?
I don't know. Where's see dinosaurs or something.
Oh, actually, no, okay.
I kind of want to see dinosaurs.
I'm taking your answer. That's actually
pretty
cool.
sick.
Yeah.
I don't
think we'd last long though. You kind of an hour would probably do me.
Yeah. Oh, you get eaten. I don't even think you could breathe. I think the oxygen, the atmosphere was very different back then. So you wouldn't even be able to breathe. You need like a spaceman suit.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So well, that's it. Good talk.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, exactly. If you're still listening, then we're gonna get.
Why?
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed it. Half the time, the podcast is like we put a mic and we keep talking as we normally were, without any point whatsoever. All right. Well, speaking of the past, today for this whole episode of the That Chapter podcast, we are going back 5 whole years. Five, if you can believe that. 5 years back to a story I covered at the very beginning of the That Chapter Cinematic Universe, That Chapter Industries, That Chapter Inc.
Nice.
I think I'll call it. I covered it in a video.
Yep.
It's a story I always really wanted to recover. I find as I go along, I'm better at making stuff because, like the video I made 5 years ago about this very topic was like 15 minutes long. This will be now probably close to an hour long podcast.
Especially with all our shite on to start.
Especially with, yeah, exactly. That's a good bit of filler there. That killed some time. But I feel like when I look back over topics I covered previously, I only scratched the surface. So I'm looking forward to doing a deep dive on a case that has actually stuck with me ever since I covered it. So today we'll be taking a second and far more detailed look at a crime that has haunted those it affected for decades. Officially, it is unsolved, but I'm fairly sure that by the end of our little chat today, and a few interjections by Dirty Keith over here, you'll probably agree that it really isn't as unsolved a mystery as authorities would have you believe. Today, it's the story of the Keddie cabin murders, which, if you would believe it, inspiration for that movie.
The Strangers.
Yes.
And I know that because I watched the video you did before.
Oh, you did? Wow.
Yeah.
I haven't even watched that.
That was my research.
Really? Okay, great. I was watching my video 5 years ago.
Much less information.
Yeah, much less information than what we're going to do today. Great, Keith. Off to a good start. I can't watch my old videos anyway. I find it impossible. I think after I make something, I can't watch it ever again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just painful to watch because you realize all the things you did wrong. You're like, oh, I shouldn't have used that. I should have done this. I should have used this piece of music. That bit doesn't fit in. Yeah. You always find like shit you did that you're unhappy with. So like once I make a video, it's like I find it really fucking hard for me to rewatch it. The worst is if somebody puts it on while I'm in the room and I'm like, I have to hear myself. Oh boy. I literally demand turn that off right now. I can't stand it.
That happen a lot, does it?
No. Not as much, thankfully, because people know I hate it when it happens. But so I didn't watch my old video, but I'm glad you did, and folks at home, you can too.
Yeah, check it out. It's good.
Thank you. I'll take your word for it. So, as always, we will start with the where. And in this case, we're in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California, and the teeny tiny community of Keddie in Plumas County. When I say tiny, I really mean it. No hyperbole here. Keddie Resort has a population of less than 100 people. It's not a town or even a village. Officially, it is a census-designated place, or CDP, which I have no idea what that means either.
I looked it up.
Well, you are a fucking nerd.
Yeah,
so what's the answer?
So basically, it just means they don't meet the legal or administration requirements to become a city or a village. It's like small population, small size, lack of resources, etc. But when looking it up, I found many of these CPD places had quite quirky and funny names, which I'm going to say right now. So one is called Intercourse, Pennsylvania, which is pretty funny, out in Pennsylvania, Amish County. So that's funny. Booger Hole in West Virginia.
That's really good.
No explanation there. Well, that's funny. That's hilarious. Chicken, Alaska. So residents, they actually wanted to name it after the native ptarmigan bird, but they couldn't agree on how to spell it, so they chose chicken.
Chicken, that's good. What's it called? That's a chicken.
Yeah. Which in fairness, all right, I'll give you a shot at spelling ptarmigan.
Does it begin with a T or a D?
Neither. It begins with a P.
Oh, okay.
Does
it begin with an S?
And then the other one, which I really liked, was Hell in Michigan.
Hell yeah.
Which is funny enough, it does freeze over in the winter.
Ooh. Wow. Was saving that. You probably looked this up like 6 months ago and you're like, oh.
Yeah. Finally get to use it.
Okay, And now a quick word from today's sponsor, folks. You know, it's the new year, and things ain't getting any cheaper, let me tell you. I think we could all do with a few more bucks in our pocket. And that's what Rocket Money is on a mission to do for you. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Now, I'm not great with money, to be honest. It's all numbers and stuff, which is why having something that does it all and helps me plan out in clear language, so incredibly helpful. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in cancelled subscriptions, saving members up to $750 a year when using all the app's premium features. So, to save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/thatchapterpod today. That's rocketmoney.com/thatchapterpod. rocketmoney.com/thatchapterpod. Thank you so much to Rocket Money for sponsoring the That Chapter podcast. Now, let's make like a rocket and get back to it. So, on April 12th, 1981, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp returned to her family's home, cabin 28 in Keddie. Sheila had spent the previous night at her friend and neighbour's house at number 27 and got home around 8 a.m. that morning. Little did Sheila know she was about to stumble into the aftermath of a brutal quadruple murder, with 3 family members, including her own mother, being among the dead. The scene was so shockingly blood-soaked that the incident at Cabin 28 has become urban legend in the area, the difference being that we know this horror show actually happened. The residents of Cabin 28 were 36-year-old Glenna Susan Sue Sharp and Sue's 5 children, 14-year-old Sheila, 15-year-old John, 12-year-old Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and the youngest 5-year-old Greg. Sue had moved the family from Connecticut to California to be near her brother, Don Davis, after her marriage to her husband, James, had fallen apart in 1979, so 2 years before the massacre at Keddie Cabin. The split was thanks mainly to his physical abuse. The family had only lived in the cabin since the previous fall in 1980, having previously occupied a trailer her brother also stayed at, in the Claremont Trailer Village in Quincy. As I mentioned, on that fateful night in April 1981, eldest daughter Sheila had been at the cabin next door, which belonged to the Seabolt family. She'd been there for a sleepover when the nightmare unfolded. Mama Sue shared one of the 2 bedrooms with Tina and with Sheila. The youngest 2, Rick and Greg, shared the other bedroom, and John used a small utility room in the basement as his own bedroom. In the cabin on the night in question were Sue, John, Tina, Rick, Greg, John's friend, 17-year-old Dana Wingate, and neighbour, 12-year-old Justin Smart, who was pals with the young'uns, Rick and Greg. The 12th of April 1981 was a Sunday, and so when Sheila entered through the front door of Cabin 28 at close to 8 a.m, she expected most, if not all, of the family to be still asleep. Instead, the first thing she saw was the body of her brother, John, lying on his back next to his friend Dana, lying face down. Both teenagers were covered in blood, with spatter all around the room. Then she saw a third body wrapped in a yellow blanket. This would be her mother, Sue, though she didn't know it yet. All 3 bodies were bound tightly with medical tape and electrical cords. Terrified, Sheila turned around and ran screaming straight back to the Seabolts next door to tell them what she'd seen. Zonita Seabolt went with Sheila to the nearest cabin with a phone, which was at number 25, to call the Plumas County Sheriff's Office. After they'd made the call, Sheila, Zonita, and Zonita's son, Jamie Seabolt, returned to the Sharps' cabin in case anyone needed help, could be helped. Amazingly, after looking through the window of Rick and Greg's room, Sheila and the Seabolts could see the boys, along with Justin Smart, seemingly sleeping peacefully in their beds. Jamie managed to wake the boys up by banging on the window, before lifting each of them out through the open window. Once the boys were clear of the house, the Sharp children went back to the Seabolts' cabin, and Justin went home.
Okay, bye, see you tomorrow.
Yeah, alright, good time. Jamie stayed behind and entered Cabin 28 through the back door to try and find Tina, who was still unaccounted for, and to check if anyone was alive. He checked each room, but very quickly realised there was simply no helping the 3 in the house, and Tina was nowhere to be found. Authorities have condemned Jamie Seabolt for going inside and potentially contaminating evidence, but honestly, there was a missing 12-year-old girl and no one knew if the people Sheila had seen were actually dead or dying, so it's fair to see why he decided to go inside. So, in Cabin 28, it was pretty damn horrifying. You had this big old family, the mama, her eldest son, and the son's friend brutally murdered inside the house while one of the daughters was having a sleepover. Another one of the daughters is now missing, and 2 of the boys and their friend were asleep throughout this entire ordeal and were absolutely fine. As you said, had a great old sleep.
Yeah.
It's weird how they slept through this entire thing.
Yeah.
Messed up.
Yeah, I find it really strange. It doesn't seem to be any explanation for that. Like, I know kids sleep heavy, but I don't know. Like, when kind of get into the crime scene, what they actually went through, I don't know how they slept through it.
Exactly,
and, it went on for a while as well.
Yeah, it wasn't pleasant. But very The Strangers-esque.
Yeah, so Deputy Hank Clement, he was the first of the officials from Plymouth County Sheriff's Office to arrive that morning. Shortly after, Clement was joined by Sergeant Jerry Schaefer. Clement told Schaefer that he'd done a cursory search of the cabin and they had a triple homicide on their hands. By this point, at around 8:25 a.m, a group of Keddie Resort residents had gathered outside to, have a bit of a gander and see what's occurring. Clement and Schaefer, they re-entered the cabin together and searched again. Then about an hour later, the deputies were joined by Sheriff Sylvester Doug Thomas, Assistant Sheriff Ken Shanks, and shortly after, Officer Don Story. Once again, the officers searched the cabin and began taking photographs of the scene and collecting, bagging and tagging evidence. And I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that this was far from the best handling of a crime scene. There's no way the scene wasn't disturbed in some way. There should have been a strict no entry policy unless absolutely necessary. Instead, they had dozens of lurkers rubbernecking right out the front and at least 7 people that we know of going inside before a single thing had been preserved.
Yeah, but Jamie,
Yeah.
The scene was as gruesome and brutal as crime scenes get. 15-year-old John had his hands tied by medical tape in front of him, and his feet were tied with an extension cord. The other end of the same extension cord had been used to tie 17-year-old Dana's ankles, with medical tape binding his hands and ankles. Sue, meanwhile, her wrists and ankles were bound by the same tape as John's hands, but she also had 3 different electrical cables wrapped around over the tape. It's like whoever wanted to do that really wanted to make sure, she could not wriggle her way out. Sue was naked from the waist down, and her underwear had been forced into her mouth as a gag, with the same medical tape that was restraining her hands, holding the underwear in place. As well as being wrapped up in the yellow blanket Sheila had already seen, Sue was also enveloped in a bedsheet, both of which had come from Tina's bed. Missing Tina. Several weapons had been used to assault the victims, but the weapon that likely dealt the final fatal injuries was a simple steak knife that was found a few inches from John's body. A second knife and a hammer were also found at the scene, but these weren't the only weapons used. An autopsy performed the day after the bodies were first discovered showed that Sue, in addition to being stabbed in the chest and through the throat, horizontally with so much force that the knife had nicked her spine and gone through her larynx, she'd also been struck to the side of the head with bruises, that matched the butt of a Daisy Powerline air rifle. So it was really freaking ghastly.
Well, yeah.
What was done to them?
They bent the knife as well. Like, that's how forceful the knife was going. Yeah. It was completely bent.
Wow.
But it's mad. It wasn't until several hours into the search of the scene that authorities finally realised that Tina was still unaccounted for, and she was listed as missing, turning the investigation into a triple homicide and kidnapped investigation. Blood evidence seemed to indicate that the majority, if not all, of the violence had occurred in the living room of Cabin 28, and the 3 young boys, Rick, Greg and Justin, appeared, as we were talking beforehand, to slept right through the carnage happening in the next room to them. Though this assumption that the boys were asleep during the assault might be wrong, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Ooh. John had been battered about the head with the hammer found at the scene, and had his throat cut on the right side. Dana had a deep laceration to the back of his head. Strangely, the autopsy showed that the wound was most likely made with a hammer, but not the hammer found at the scene. Unlike Sue and John, who had both been killed with a combination of stab wounds and blunt force trauma, Dana had been asphyxiated by way of manual strangulation. Importantly, there were no signs of forced entry or a break-in, leading investigators to conclude very early on in the investigation that whoever committed the crime was either known to the family or was at least able to gain enough trust that the family would let them in voluntarily. Though nothing of any significant value was missing, which would indicate burglary as a motive, several key items were noted to be missing from the cabin. These included Tina's jacket and shoes, as well as a toolbox, which was apparently full of, tools. The cabin curtains were closed and the phone line had been cut. So this was like a fairly well-oiled machine operation, whoever did this. They not only brought tools, they took things with them, they took the phone line, all that kind of stuff. Jamie Seabolt, when he told the police that when he entered the house, he did so through the back door, which was already unlocked and slightly open.
That's terrifying that the phone lines were cut.
Yeah, it's real, like, stalkery.
Yeah. That's very like The Strangers.
Yeah.
So despite detectives finding knife marks on walls throughout the house, a bloody fingerprint on a doorframe and on a handrail, plus a footprint at the rear of the cabin, for a scene with so much blood, there was actually a lack of real physical evidence like fingerprints and other identifiable markers that you'd expect to find if this had been, like spur of the moment, impulsive driven crime. So for the scene to be this clean, this had to have been planned.
Yeah.
Which, it's weird though, because like other parts of the crime scene, they seem to kind of contradict that idea as well.
Yeah.
Like the fact that the killers used multiple methods of killing, stabbing, blunt force trauma, strangulation, like that kind of variety often points to like frenzied violence or someone like losing control in the heat of the moment or not being able to control the situation.
Yeah.
It could suggest like the killers, they were improvising with whatever they had in hand. It didn't seem like they brought a lot in themselves. It was like what was there, which is, it was planned but not really controlled, but also controlled because it was clean.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It's very contradictory about what was done. Investigators were fairly certain that the violent action had been confined to the living room, but the blood evidence indicated that the victims had been moved around the room. See, in some areas, blood had pooled in such amounts that someone must have been bleeding there for some time, but then moved. Likewise, spatter patterns showed that some of the stabbing and battery must have happened with the victims in different places to where they were found. Sue had blood on the bottoms of her feet, leading investigators to surmise that she may have at least temporarily been able to walk around, probably physically escorted by her captors. Speaking of, police figured that there was likely a minimum of 2 perpetrators at the scene in order to have had, the level of control over their victims that they did. The Sharps' immediate neighbours, as well as other Keddie locals, were questioned about the night of the 11th and the morning of the 12th of April. And the most surprising thing was that no one, not any of them, not the Seabolts or any other direct neighbours, reported hearing a thing during the hours that the murders happened. If you can believe that. Keith, can you believe it? I don't think so. On the money, baby. The only potential witnesses were a couple living at cabin 16, who recalled hearing what sounded like muffled screaming at around 1:15 a.m, but they were unable to say where it came from. That said, with hindsight, it's almost certain that what they were hearing were the death throes of their neighbours. Police also noted another unidentified neighbour who had heard a dog barking close to cabin 28, and another said they saw a porch light on at almost 4 a.m. Several people reported seeing a green van that they didn't recall seeing before parked outside the Sharps' cabin close to 9 p.m. Absolutely nothing that would indicate the havoc that was meted out inside cabin 28, however.
It's wild that nobody heard anything. Like initially when I was reading about this, when I heard of like, oh, it's happening in a cabin, my mind went to, it's a secluded cabin in middle of nowhere. It's not. I had a look, like they're really close together. They're proper neighbours. And there's just a load of cabins around an area, so I don't know how they didn't hear anything.
I know, but then it's like, well, you have the boys who were sleeping in the same house.
Yeah, and they didn't
allegedly slept through the whole thing.
Yeah, very weird.
Very weird, yeah.
So, with no witnesses, they were pretty reliant on evidence, but unfortunately, the crime took place well before the collection of hair, fibre and other DNA identifying evidence became routine in homicide investigations. And so, even with huge advances in technology, we simply have nothing to test that could put a lid on the investigation once and for all. That said, we may not need to. As in many people's opinions, the mystery of what happened at Keddie Cabin 28 has an obvious answer all along.
Now we get into the juicy deets, my friends. See, shortly after the murders happened, the Sharps' neighbour and Justin Smart's father, remember Justin Smart, he was in the cabin along with the Sharps' youngest, Greg and Rick. He'd been sleeping there the whole night. Justin Smart allegedly slept through the entire thing. Well, Justin Smart's dad, Martin Smart, told police that a claw hammer had mysteriously gone missing from his cabin. Now, there was no way Martin should have known that a hammer was used in the crime. And so, there shouldn't have been a reason for him to go to the police when he realised it was missing. Most of us would simply think we'd misplaced the hammer, rather than thinking, I know they're busy investigating the triple murder and child kidnapping, but I really need to tell the police about this. Is a missing hammer usually something you contact the police about?
I know, yeah.
I doubt it.
How am I meant to listen to my favourite song? You can't touch this. It's hammer time, baby!
Hey! This is why I have you on the podcast. As far as he should have been aware at the time, he just couldn't find his hammer. But thanks to Martin constantly trying to help and insert himself into the investigation, Plumas County Sheriff Thomas had him as his primary suspect. This wouldn't be the first time a killer tried to get involved in the investigation of their crimes. It's actually a pretty common tactic used by killers to not only keep up with what the police know and try and throw them off the trail, but it's basically one of the main ways to for them to get their kicks. They get off on getting off on the power trip, knowing they're right there with the people hunting them, playing around with them. They feel like a cat playing with a mouse or whatever. Unfortunately for Martin Smart, a lot of serial killers actually have surprisingly high IQs. But that wasn't the case with Martin, who was, technically speaking, a complete fucking idiot.
Oh, yeah, he was paralyzed from the ears up.
Yeah, that's good on him.
You like that?
Yeah, I like that. Instead of reveling in the clueless police chasing their tails, Martin went ahead and put himself at the top of their suspect list. Unfortunately for the rest of us, the police just turned out to be equally as paralyzed from the ears up as Martin was. So, what would be the motive? Well, the rumor about town was that Martin Smart, Marty, in addition to being an all-round piece of shite, he was physically abusive towards his then wife, Marilyn. And remember, Sue Sharp had been through a similar experience with her husband. That's why she had left Connecticut, because James Sharp had been beaten 17 to child out of her, basically. Yeah. So when you take that into account, her leaving James, who didn't pay child support, that meant that Sue and, the family of 6, they were left in severe financial hardship. And Sue had to make do with just $250 a month, which was a stipend payment from the Navy as James had previously enlisted. And that $250 had to stretch a long way to keep 6 people fed and clothed. But Sue was making do. Basically, it's a long way of saying Sue must have had some balls and learned the hard way to stand up for herself. And maybe, just maybe, she was trying to pass off some of that, hard-earned wisdom. She's basically trying to impart it to Marilyn Smart, her neighbor, a friend of hers, who was also, an abused woman.
Going through the same thing, yeah.
Sue Sharp saw Marilyn Smart as, a younger version of her. I've been there, this is what you need to do, blah, 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 whatever. So word was, though, that Marty Smart might have gotten wind of their secret chats and was not too keen that his bride might be getting some backup. Apparently, when Marty found out, he went absolutely bonkers. And if he was beating Marilyn on the regular, beating his wife on the regular, it's not a great stretch to think he was capable of an explosion of violence like the cabin massacre. The investigators' conclusion that the scene was too well controlled for one unarmed person, it's almost certainly true. There had to have been more than one person. So no matter how well known the killer was to the family and how much they trusted them, there's simply no way that one of the 3 victims wouldn't have done a legger at the front door, raised the alarm if they were being threatened by just one person. So, who would Marty have called on to help commit a triple homicide? His good mate Severin. Severin. That's cool name. Very cool name. Yeah. Clearly a killer. Clearly a murderer. Yeah, for sure.
That's a bad guy name.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good ass bad guy name.
Yeah, it is.
Marty had a housemate at the time of the killings named Severin John Boubidi, known as Boo.
That's not a killer name.
No, that's a terrible surname. Honestly, change your name. Just go by Severin.
It's a Boo or Bo?
Boo? That's Bo.
I guess Boo's scarier. Boo.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah. Boo, or Bo, was already a convicted felon before the murders took place. And local accounts say he and Marty, they were pretty tight.
See, it couldn't be Marty because his son, Justin Smart, he just happened to suddenly and miraculously retrieve a memory from the deep recesses of his mind.
Ooh, tell me more.
So a memory that, you wouldn't believe it, exonerated his father.
Whoa, what are the odds?
I know, right? So according to Justin, he woke up late on the night of the 11th when sounds from the living room disturbed him.
So he'd been in the bedroom with Rick and Greg, the surviving Sharp children, and he just wakes up in the middle of the night. And they've never backed up, apparently they were asleep at the time, so they never backed up this story, he says, of seeing something.
Yeah, so initially it was like, oh, they don't remember anything, but now that they're starting to look at his father, it's like, actually, hang on a second.
Yeah, you're looking at my dad.
I just remembered something.
Yeah.
So he went to see what the noises were and saw Sue and 2 men talking. Surprisingly, he was able to give a pretty detailed description of each of the 2 men. So both were somewhere between 20 and 30 years old. One was around 5'6", 5'10", the other 5'11" to 6'2". The shorter of the 2 men had a mustache with short slicked back black hair, and the taller man was clean shaven and had long dark blonde hair. They both wore round, golden-framed reading glasses, like 2 men planning on committing a horrifying torture and murder massacre would definitely do.
Let me wear my best glasses.
Yeah, right. So a fight had broken out when John and Dana came back to the cabin. Tina was woken by the ruckus and had come in to investigate, but was taken outside by one of the men. That's where Justin's memory failed him, and he couldn't get any further.
No, my damn brain, this damn mind of mine. Work, damn it. I've got nothing.
I'm sure I'll come up with something soon, though.
Yeah.
And you're probably wondering how Justin suddenly managed to pull these very specific, very exonerating memories out of his arse and completely out of nowhere. Well, you'll be surprised to learn that actually he had a little help with that. And not from the person that you'd expect, though. Justin was helped along with his recollections of the evening by a hypnotist brought in by the police. And if you think that's fucking stupid, well then hold on to your little hat with an umbrella on, because it's about to get a whole lot stupider.
Yeah, rather than calling on the help of one of the dozens of professional sketch artists the FBI had at their disposal, the sheriff's office decided to get a guy named Harlan Embry to do the sketches. And it was literally like, head down to pub, sure, I'm sure somebody can draw. You know, literally just got a guy who has no credentials in forensic drawing, and sure, lash him up there, and that'll do.
I was like, my son's pretty good at drawing, actually. We'll get him in.
Yeah, sure, he can do it.
Save a bit of money for the Christmas party, lads.
Yeah. And so they ended up drawing of 2 sketches. It just looks very, very dumb and very bad and weird. They're literally, just as described, 2 nondescript men, one with a moustache and short hair combed back, the other with long hair, no moustache, both wearing more or less the same glasses, and it could literally be anybody. It's very bad. And ever since the night of the murders, Justin has given several varying accounts of what he quote-unquote witnessed that night. At first, he said he heard nothing. Himself, Rick, and Greg slept through the entire night while there was 3 people being murdered right beside him. Then, according to his mother, Marilyn Smart, he'd been able to describe the murders to her. Then, he'd only heard what had happened. Then he'd seen it in a dream. And then finally, he recalled seeing the whole 2 men in gold glasses thing under hypnosis. So to say Justin was an unreliable narrator is a pretty big understatement, and at the end of the day, you gotta remember, it's his dad, everybody was saying, is the most likely suspect, so it's gonna have 1,000,001 different stories. And so, I hear you're barking, big dog. You're thinking, what happened to Tina? The one person of the Sharp family who was never found. She was not found, missing 12-year-old girl. Well, it's a good job you remembered her, because the FBI didn't give a shit about her. In fact, it only took 2 weeks for the FBI to pack up and leave town, deeming the Cali State Department and the local sheriffs, they were doing a bang-up job by themselves. We're clearly not needed.
Yeah. Seems like you got it, boys, yeah?
Yeah, have a good time. Hope you find her. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, authorities hoped that Tina had simply seen something the night and had fled into the woods to hide. Neighbours told them that Tina often camped out in the woods nearby and would build little forts and dens and hideouts. But sadly, this isn't a happy endings kind of story, and that was not the case. When she wasn't found within a few days, authorities pivoted to a kidnapping operation. The search, without the FBI's presence, was limited to a 5-mile radius of Cabin 28, which is a very small radius when you're talking about a fucking kidnapping.
Well, everyone knows kidnappers don't go further than 5 miles.
Of course, there's a limit, it's a force field. Right? They literally can't take their victim 5 miles away, more than 5 miles away. So despite officers and volunteers combing the area with canine teams, the search was fruitless. And soon after, thinking changed from a kidnapping and potential rescue to another murder and recovery of Tina's remains. It wouldn't be until 11 days after the 3-year anniversary of the massacre at Cabin 28 that the mystery of what happened to Tina Sharp that night finally got an answer. On April 22nd, 1984, a man collecting bottles just outside of Camp 18, around 5 miles from Feather Falls in Butte County, found what he thought looked like pieces of human bones. Specifically, a portion of skull and jawbone. Butte, it neighbours Plumas to the west, but Keddie to Butte Valley is still more than 60 miles, or nearly an hour-and-a-half drive away, so it looks like maybe they might have found her... Man, 5 miles was just a little bit too short than the 60 miles she was actually there.
Just a little bit shy.
Yeah, they really should have pushed it by a little bit more there. Could have found something. Shortly after the grim discovery, Plumas County sheriffs got an anonymous call telling them that the bones belonged to Tina Sharp. For some reason, I wonder why, the call wasn't documented at the time, despite it being key to identifying the remains. After the anonymous tip came in, a forensic pathologist was able to confirm that the section of cranium and mandible did indeed belong to the missing 12-year-old. How they got to the location they were found, we still don't know. A further search of the area failed to find the rest of Tina's remains, but it did turn up a blue jacket, blanket, a pair of Levi's, which were missing the back pocket, and maybe most importantly of all, an empty medical tape reel, exactly like the victims had been tied up with. The discovery, though sad, did briefly reignite interest in the case, and raised hopes that maybe with Tina's fate now known, the case might finally be solved. Plenty of theories were tossed around, from drugs and a visiting serial killer, all the way down to Keith's favorite, satanic rituals.
Yes.
Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole were known to have been active in the area right at the time the Keddie cabin killings took place and naturally drew attention, but that line of inquiry was quickly shut down coast to coast.
Disappointingly, the interest kickstarted by the discovery of the bones died out relatively quick, and it would be even longer than 3 years before there'd be any substantial progress in the case. So the case lay cold for a long time, then suddenly things began to come out. Not new discoveries though, but old ones that were, for some reason, hadn't been fully investigated or made public before. So whether that was out of malice or incompetence depends on your own interpretation, but whatever motivated the evidence being buried, sometimes literally at the bottom of a box, it happened, and it might just have let 2 very obviously guilty men go free.
Yeah, very obviously guilty men. But that's the thing about this case. It's like, you know, even at the start when we're talking about how the crime scene wasn't done properly and evidence contamination and shit like that, it really does. The whole Plumas County Sheriff's Office stinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
No bueno, el stinko. It's pretty messed up.
They really biffed this one.
Even though Martin, Ray, Marty Smart, and Severin John Boo, Boo Bead or Boo Beady. Is it Boo Bead or Boo Beady? I'm going to say Boo Bead.
Who cares? He's an asshole.
That's true. We do not give a shit about pronouncing assholes' names. Well, they were the only seriously considered suspects in the killings. And neither of them, though, neither Marty nor Bo were ever arrested, let alone charged or tried for the horrific crime. According to his police interview after the murders, Marty told police that himself, his wife Marilyn, and Bo had stopped by Cabin 28 on their way to the bar for a night on the town. They'd invited Sue Sharp to tag along, but she declined, and the 3 of them they went on without her. They didn't stay at the local bar for too long, though. Marty, he made a very loud and aggressive point that he simply did not like the music. This is shy. So they'd be leaving. And I've seen quite a lot of speculation that this was intentional, and Marty was trying to create an alibi for the night. Now, I'm not sure how much truth there is to that, but it's certainly a possibility. See, what happened after was, well, they went back to their own cabin. Arriving home close to 11 p.m., Marilyn decided to go to bed, but curiously, Marty and Bo decided that the music wasn't quite that bad after all, actually. I like some of those tunes, and decided to go back to the bar they literally just left. As in, they simply just wanted to get rid of Marilyn.
Yeah.
That was their whole thing.
What's mad though, so not only did they make a scene leaving because the owner switched the music from country to rock, which apparently they didn't like, but Marty and Bo had also showed up that night wearing a 3-piece suit, both of them, and both of them wearing sunglasses as well, which, you know, let's be real, Keddie's backdoor bar isn't exactly the kind of place where people dress like that.
Yeah, this is a freaking neighborhood cabin bar in the middle of the mountains.
Yeah, they were trying hard to stand out. And then when they got back to their cabin after storming out, Marty called the bar to complain about the music again before ultimately returning. So they showed up in these 3-piece suits, glasses, made a big scene in the bar, went home, then decided to call the bar to complain again. Then they came back to the bar again.
What?
So it just seems complete overkill for an alibi.
Yeah, absolutely. Marty and Bo said that once again they didn't stay at the bar, and the 2 returned to their cabin an hour later. Marilyn claimed that she was awoken early in the morning, around 2 a.m., and saw the 2 men burning items on the stove, drunkenly trying to cook frickin' bacon or something, which I have been done before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a few fire alarms go off when I drunkenly tried to cook bacon. Marilyn also told detectives that her husband, Marty, hated 15-year-old John Sharp with a passion, and Bo had his own issues with the teenager. They both had reason and opportunity to kill John and his mother, and it's most likely that John's friend Dana was the victim of tragic circumstances, as was Tina, having been woken up by the disturbance and witnessing Marty and Bo during the assault. She was killed likely to keep her quiet, with her possibly being taken away from the cabin alive while the men debated what to do with her, before ultimately deciding they couldn't risk letting her go. Of course, that's all just speculation, but that's one of the theories that seems to make the absolute most sense.
It does make sense. So in the more than 40 years since the murders, Marilyn she's been very open and outspoken about her belief that her ex and his pal committed to the Keddie cabin slayings. She was confident enough to repeat her suspicions in a 2008 documentary about the Keddie killings. By then, her ex and Bo were no longer any kind of threat. So Martin Smart, he died of cancer in June 2000, and he was living as a free man in Portland, Oregon at the time. Bo was already long dead by then, having died 7 years after the killings in Chicago in 1988. So the cabin itself, that was also finally demolished in 2004 as well.
It's long been rumoured around the county that right when the police were on the cusp of being ready to bring in Marty and Bo for questioning as suspects, both men suddenly upped and moved out of state. There's also been a lot of speculation that it was someone working in the Plumas County Sheriff's Office, perhaps even the sheriff himself, had tipped off Marty as to the police's intentions, that they were going to wrestle him up. The Plumas County Sheriff at the time of the slayings, Doug Thomas, has come under fire for his handling of the investigation, to the point that he's even been accused of conspiring with the killers in a cover-up. Now, former Sheriff Doug Thomas has always seemed to put far more weight into the two mystery men with the golden glasses described by Justin Smart, rather than the much more likely culprits, his buddies, Marty and Bo. According to Doug Thomas, Marty Smart passed the lie detector test with flying colours. But of course, if you know anything about lie detectors and human anatomy, you know they're basically complete and utter bullshit as a scientific measuring device. The use of polygraph machines really doesn't go past being an intimidation tool, intimidation tactic, and even then it relies on a huge amount of theatre and expertise to be remotely useful.
So there's definitely something off about Sheriff Doug Thomas. So earlier when we mentioned that Marty's son went under hypnosis to try and remember the details.
Oh, right. That's when he suddenly remembered, the golden glasses guys.
Yeah, apparently who done the first session was Doug Thomas. So
you hypnotized them? Wow.
Yeah, so apparently he attended 2 different training sessions to learn hypnosis. And then he did the first one, which helped prompt these people. And then also Doug Thomas and Marty, they were really close. They were good buddies. Thomas himself allegedly said that he and Marty were great pals, and Marty spent hours with him while he was on patrol. He also said that Martin and Marilyn Smart, they came to him once for marriage counselling, but he said he pointed out that he was hardly the right person to give advice, which I definitely agree. Like, who goes to the county sheriff when you need some relationship advice?
Right.
But what I also found really weird, but could be a coincidence, but possibly not, Doug Thomas, he actually lived in cabin 28 prior to the Sharps' arrival. And Thomas allegedly allowed Marty to live in cabin 28 with him for a time when he was having some marriage problems with Marilyn as well.
Wow, I did not know that. That is fascinating.
Just seems a bit too coincidental.
They lived in the cabin and then people very interesting. So the man tasked with continuing the investigation going forward is current Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood. Hagwood was 16 years old when the Keddie killings took place and was actually friends with the Sharp children. In particular, John and Dana Wingate, they were all friends together, with whom he'd worked at the Plumas County Fairground the previous summer. So it's fair to say the case is unusually personal for him, and unlike his predecessor, who was friends with the suspects, this new guy is friends with the victims. So it's unlikely anyone will be accusing him of participating in any cover-ups. Under Sheriff Hagwood's watch, there's actually been a surprising amount of progress in the case. Hagwood appointed a retired deputy named Mike Gamberg as special investigator into the case. Gamberg was a deputy in 1981 and has himself become very controversial thanks to his outspokenness while dealing with the case. On the plus side though, Gamberg's review of the case was responsible for turning up the anonymous call that helped identify Tina Sharp's remains. The recording had literally been shoved to the bottom of the box that was buried in an evidence locker. It's like somebody tried to hide it before Gamberg took over. The review also dug up what is considered by most people to be the strongest piece of physical evidence. A letter from Marty Smart to his soon-to-be ex-wife Marilyn Smart, written during their marriage and shortly after Marty left Keddie for Reno, Nevada. The letter essentially amounts to the closest thing we have to a recorded confession in the case, with Marty writing, quote, "I've paid the price for your love, and now that I bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me we're true. Great, what else do you want?" I know, it's so weirdly written. It's like, what?
The sarcasm in that is so strong. Like, I killed 4 people and you're leaving me? Great, that's just great.
Wait, you want me to kill more people? There aren't too many ways to interpret those words without concluding that Marty Smart was involved in the Keddie murders, murdering Sue Sharp, John Sharp, Tina Sharp, and Dana Wingate. On March 24th, 2016, there was a completely unexpected development in the case, when a hammer matching the description of the one Marty had said gone missing, that hammer was actually found at the bottom of a pond in Keddie. This was almost 35 years after the murders. The location it was found in was described as its being there could only have been intentional. There was no way it was misplaced or put there by any sort of accident. This hammer had been hidden. Gamberg has his suspicions about his former boss, old Sheriff Doug Thomas, who, Gamberg says, fired him as a deputy a couple of weeks before the killings, but then later rehired him. A condition of being rehired, Gamberg claims, was that he wasn't allowed to work on the Cabin 28 murders. Gamberg clearly has, an antagonistic relationship with former Sheriff Doug Thomas, so it's hard to consider him 100% impartial, but given Gamberg's credentials, with him having worked for the Justice Department in Sacramento, the job he left Keddie for, it's impossible not to at least take the accusation a little more seriously than the usual internet shite. Definitely seems like Doug Thomas wanted full control of the investigation and didn't want anybody looking too closely. So the overlooking of evidence, like the phone call and the confession letter, certainly indicated that something was amiss during the original investigation under Sheriff Thomas. To throw even more fuel to the conspiracy fire, also discovered was a statement from a counselor at Reno Veterans Administration. Marty Smart had been seen a few times. He'd seen this counselor, and in his statement, the counselor alleged that during one conversation, Marty confessed to killing Sue Sharp and Tina Sharp, but claimed he had nothing to do with John or Dana's deaths. According to the statement, Marty told his counselor that he did indeed only kill Tina because she'd seen him kill Sue, her mother, and would have been a witness.
The counsellor said that he advised Marty that he needed to turn himself in, but he said when he said that, Marty just smiled at his advice.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe Marty was under the assumption that murder that he told to his counsellor will remain confidential, but it's not the case though. And apparently the counsellor, he did alert authorities about this, but it didn't lead to an arrest. It didn't lead to anything, not even a question. Nothing happened from it.
Yeah, it definitely seems like he had protection from someone in the police force who was just letting him slide. Let him slide through the whole thing. I mean, they had a written confession, all these things. It's like,
what more do you need?
So Sheriff Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg are still actively looking into the case. This case is what? It's I have to do the math in my head. It's 40. Old. It's old. This is an old case. It's like what? Almost 50 years old at this point. Yeah, 45.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, 44. It's 44 years old today. It took me that long, folks, to do the math in my head.
I didn't even bother. I'm going to trust your...
Okay, thank you. And I've probably gotten that wrong too. But guess what, folks? A special announcement was made most recently in April of 2018, when Special Investigator Mike Gamberg tried a twist that no one expected by stating that they had managed to recover DNA from a piece of medical tape used to bind one of the victims. Not only had they managed to get a match to this mysterious DNA, but, Keith, hold on to your butt.
Okay.
It matched.
I'm holding it.
Good. A living suspect.
All right, okay.
They found DNA that matched a living suspect. Who that is, we don't know, and nothing else has been made public since, but it's insane. The only two real suspects, were Marty and Bo, both of whom are dead.
Yeah.
Who is this mystery persona?
Yeah. Very interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
So we could get justice.
We could, technically. I mean, this was 6 years ago that they said it was living, so maybe he's dead now. It's a lot of time to die.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But you never know. That's crazy. There might have been somebody else there. And maybe Marty... Well, I'd find it very unlikely that Marty's innocent. Maybe Bo wasn't involved. Maybe there was 3 of them there that night.
Who knows?
Whom knows, Keith? Gamberg has long made it known that he has 6 suspects he believes were involved in the murders. All of them are alive.
6?
6.
That's
he
crazy.
says he's 6 people he has on his suspect list.
And all of them are still alive.
Not counting Marty or Bo. So 6 more people. I mean, there could be a whole other side of the story that's never been made public, and the people who they truly believe did it, they've never named for fear of, scaring them or causing them to flee or whatever.
There does seem to be a huge cover-up, though. It's
definitely, for sure.
Especially for the area as well. Like, I think they done a census in, 2010, and in the whole Keddie area, there's 66 people. So it's small. Like, it just kind of, it feels like it's one of those murders where, most of the town could be somewhat involved or implicated, But, it's wild, Yeah,
nobody gets up here by accident, so definitely it's like people know each other and they know what's going on. Yeah. So sadly, that's as much as we know for sure, but considering the hammer's discovery and the possibility of DNA being identified with modern techniques, maybe we will have an update for you eventually, and finally, perhaps, if we are lucky, a definitive ending to what really happened in Cabin 28 almost 50 years ago. and Sinead, folks. That is it. That is the story of the Keddie cabin murders.
That is wild.
Yeah, it's a crazy story.
Yeah.
It's a real wild one.
Do you know what I find really like terrifying?
What's that, Keith?
I definitely feel Marty's somewhat involved in this. But if he was involved, he went to the cabin to kill those people when his son was having a sleepover. That's wild.
That is
it?
weird. That's a crazy thing to do. I mean, the chances of them, the three boys sleeping through the night, which what they did, allegedly is what they did, would have been very, like, you must have thought, like, oh, he could walk in at any moment.
Yeah.
Like, why would if you wanted to kill them so bad, why not do it any other night?
Yeah, why the night where your
there?
son's sleeping over in the house? That's just very strange.
Yeah.
I've seen loads of different theories online with just like where like Marlon's involved, and even like Justin, who was like I think he was like 12 at the time, but he was somewhat involved. I don't know how true these are. Like, this is all allegedly. I don't know, but like it just seems weird. It's just very strange. Yeah, there's a lot of open-ended questions with this case, but hopefully there's some resolution to it, because I'd be fascinated to find out.
Fascinated. I'd love to. Hopefully we'll be able to do even just a quick update eventually in the future.
But full podcast. We're going to do it again.
Yes, exactly. Retake the entire thing from head to toe. So there you go. Thanks for listening, folks. Hope you enjoyed this whole episode of the That Chapter podcast. Have a happy and magical, blessed New Year to each and every one of you. I decided I want to do the podcast in 2025. But yeah, no, here, have a happy New Year to each and every one of yous. Means a lot to me. It means a lot to the big guy over here. The next episode will be up on Monday. But yeah, I think that wraps up this whole episode. Stick around for 2025. We've got some real good ones coming down the way.
Bangers coming up.
We do. We were just talking about what's the next like list of episodes we want to start covering. So stay tuned, folks. Stay tuned. But until then, please take care of each other and yourselves, because I love ya.
And I'll see you.
All right, Mike out.
Martin Smart. Martin Smart.
Smart. That's not very smart of me to say.
Nice.
Bo Booby for questioning. Sorry, I fucking hate his surname. I'm not saying it anymore. I'm just saying Bo. Marty and Bo. His surname sucks.
Yeah, I know. It's so hard.
It's long.
Almost as hard as Smart.
Yeah.